May I have your attention, please?
Welcome to Real Gaijin, unveiling the real Japan, an American expat's inside look. Now it's time for another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts. Summarized Podcast. My name is Mark Kennedy. I am the host of the Real Gaijin Substack and also the Real Gaijin AMA podcast. Today we have yet another special guest. This is Andrew Neuman. Now, I have known Andrew through LinkedIn for quite a while. He's my essential senpai. Few years, probably a little bit more my senior in terms of a very long period of time for being old hands in Japan, studying from the 80s and still being involved in Japan to this day. But particularly after listening to Andrew's interview with another podcast named Unpacking Japan last November, where he talked about being an adoptive parent, not only have I admired Andrew and his commentary for a long time, but I'm truly, absolutely in awe of what he has done by becoming an adoptive parent. And that's why I really wanted to take this time to introduce to you Andrew and what he's been doing. And we won't go into too much detail about the personal specifics of his son in order to protect Andrew's privacy and his wife's privacy and their son's privacy. But we're going to get into the story of how Andrew found his son at a children's home in Osaka when he was only 8. Now his son is in university and doing just fine. But we're going to hear all about that. But then we're going to also jump into a little bit of a bigger discussion about the state of adoption in Japan and where it's going. So, Andrew, first of all, welcome.
Thank you very much, and also it's my honor to meet you finally virtually. We'll meet in person. I hope someday soon. But it is my honor to be invited onto this podcast. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Very good. And also, two housekeeping things before we get started. We already have several people who have joined us. Thank you very much. Welcome. Notice that chat functionality at the bottom of your screen or at the side of your screen. This is live. We are talking live with Andrew Neuman right now. If you have any questions, comments, or whatever, please put them in the chat, and the two of us will monitor the chat as we go. Particularly, I will monitor the chat because Andrew's going to do all the talking. The other thing is we will be putting a recording out. Give me about 24 hours, and I'll get that out. So in case you missed it, you'll be able to go back and listen to the discussion, and also I'll put a few key takeaways in there, and also links to how to get in touch with Andrew if you want to do one-on-one discussion. All right. Before we get into the whole stories of your experience as an adoptive parent, Andrew, first, please tell us a little bit about your path to Japan. How did you get here? How long have you been here? What are you doing?
Yes, well, thank you for that. It's a question I'm well practiced for by now. My journey to Japan is kind of interesting. I'm from California. When I entered UC Davis in 1982, one of my dad's friends suggested that I take Japanese because I liked foreign language. It was a interest of mine. And so I said, fine. I didn't know anything about Japan. And I took my first quarter at UC Davis in Japanese, and it was somewhat frightening experience. I was in a class of 140 people. In those days, most of my fellow students were Japanese American, and they had been to Japanese school on Saturdays. So when this teacher started writing these weird hieroglyphics up on the chalkboard, and it was a chalkboard back then, they're all going ah e u a o, and I'm like, oh, what is this stuff? And and for that class in my final exam, I had to remember 45 kanji. And I remember panicking the night before my exam because I thought 45 kanji, I can't possibly memorize those things. And it was like I was trying to put these strange characters into my brain, and I still remember now trying to remember, okay, ue looks like it's on top of my desk, and then shita is under my desk. So, and then from there, I somehow memorized these 45 kanji. Um, After 2 years of Japanese at Davis, I had an opportunity to study at International Christian University in Tokyo, or ICU. At that time, it was the only university that the UC had an exchange relation
Mm.
with. I lived in an all men's dormitory on campus. Actually, just Friday night, we had a reunion with one of our members who was visiting from Hong Kong. So, what I want to say is, I lived in a dormitory with about 40 individuals, and the relationships, the friendships that I built during that year last until this day. The Hoshonin, the guarantor for my apartment, is my dorm mate's wife. She's Japanese. We've helped another friend's daughter get into Akita International University by helping her train for her English interview and exam for that university. All of these connections continue to this day. After graduation from UC Davis, I came to Japan to work as a translator. Spent the next few years going between Japan and the US, always in Japan related work that used my Japanese ability. And then I went to Cornell University. I studied in the MBA with Japanese concentration. Again, working between Japan and the US at companies like Yahoo, etc. And then in 2015, I was working for a small Japanese startup that unfortunately was going to close their California office because of the sudden weakening of the yen. They couldn't afford to sustain it anymore. But it was an opportunity for me to transfer with the company to Japan. And that was an opportunity for me to say, all right, this is a chance for me to raise my son in Japan
Mm.
versus the US. I had several concerns about living in the US for my son. The primary two concerns were safety and freedom of movement.
Yeah.
So he has both of those here in Japan. It's now been 11 years since we moved to Japan permanently, and I believe it was the right decision for my son. Everyone's case is individual, but I think it was the right decision. Um, so that's about me in particular. If you
Great.
want me to stop there and give a brief overview of the adoption experience, and then we can get into particular questions, I can do that. Or how would you like?
Yeah. I tell you what, that's great. This is not all about you. It's all about what you and your family have done to
Yeah,
raise a child in Japan that you've adopted.
yeah,
Before we get into your specific situation, I just want to put this in context here by reading some facts. Apparently, there are about 42,000 children in Japan that cannot live with their biological parents. All sorts of reasons, usually abuse, neglect, poverty, etc. And then about 80 or 90% of them, which translates into about 30,000 to 36,000, are in institutions, orphanages, or what the Japanese call children's homes. So that's a large number.
yes.
Now, about 15 to 20% are in foster care or family based settings. So, therefore, the actual orphans with no living parents are the very small percentage. We're talking about 2 to 3% are truly orphans.
Hmm.
The adoption flow is, believe it or not, based on all sorts of reasons that we're going to get into in just a minute, only 300 to 500 children per year are adopted through formal channels. That is a tiny fraction of the above. And you represent an even smaller fraction of that because you are not a Japanese national.
Hmm.
So, with that context in place, please tell us a little bit about your own
Sure.
experience?
Sure, will do. So, the at the time of our adoption journey began was July 4th, 2010. I remember the date very well. My wife and I had tried to have our own child biologically, lots of appointments with the doctor, etc. And so we had resigned ourselves not to have children, very unfortunately. I belong to a wonderful organization in California, part of the Toastmasters organization, if you're familiar with that, a public speech making club. I belong to Japanese English Toastmasters in San Francisco. This is a club that gathered 2 times a month in San Francisco to give speeches in Japanese and English. And it was a mixed group of Japanese and non Japanese. Fabulous club. Many people met and married through that club. Many people established lifelong friendships through that club. And one couple in particular, she's Japanese, he's Japanese American. They met and married through JETS. It's called JETS, not to be confused with the JET
No.
program.
Right.
And they bought a house together in the East Bay of San Francisco, and they hosted um, 3 barbecues a year: Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day. And all of the JETS current members and former members get together and bring their families, etc. We went on July 4th, 2010, and a couple arrived. And the wife is Japanese American, a member of JETS. Her husband is Indian, and they had a beautiful daughter with them who to me still looks like she's mixed Japanese and Indian, although she's pure Japanese. And we started talking with them and said, how old's your daughter? And they said she's 18 months. But we've had her for 12 months. And we said, well, how does that work? They said, well, we adopted her from Japan. And both my wife and I, our hearts, our minds were open to the idea of adoption. And it just seemed natural that we would adopt from Japan. It's a place that I had a deep connection to. And so the very next day, July 5th, 2010, I contacted Bay Area Adoption Services in in the South Bay, and they have since merged with another group. But I started the adoption, filling out the paperwork, which took about 6 months. And then we filed our paperwork just a few days with before March 11th, 2011.
Mm.
And I had just submitted my paperwork, and then I saw on Facebook all these people said, "There's just been a huge earthquake here." I turned on my TV. It was about midnight in California at the time, and I saw all this devastation. And I really thought that the chances of us adopting were over already before we had started, because it looked like all of Japan had fallen into the ocean. And we know now that wasn't the case, but it looked pretty bad. And our paperwork had been sent to an agency here in Japan called International Social Services Japan. They are the only adoption agency in Japan that handles older adoptions. Older adoptions means any child over the age of 3 years old.
Oh, okay.
And usually you hear back from them in about 2 weeks if they've reviewed your package and approve you as adoptive parents. They also provide social outreach for disasters, etc. And so they were obviously very busy, and we did not hear anything from them for 6 months. Finally, in May of 2011, um, excuse me, it was we didn't hear anything from them for about 2 months. So May of 2011, we got the word that we had been approved as adoptive parents. In our case, then fast forward, it was 3.5 years of waiting before we got the phone call that we had been matched with an 8-year-old boy. I was actually here in Japan. It was July 1st, 2013. And so it had been quite a long wait for us. The reason is as foreign adoptive parents living outside of Japan, we are lowest in the priority for adoptions. So, number one priority is a Japanese couple living in Japan, a Japanese couple living outside of Japan, then a foreign couple living in Japan, and finally, foreign couple living outside of Japan. So, all of these dates that I've just mentioned you are burned into my mind. They're unforgettable dates. And it was another uh, 4 months until we actually could go to Japan and pick up our son.
Oh,
Uh, the situation, that process has changed fundamentally, which I can explain about more, but I'll stop here and let you ask some further questions or if we have questions from the audience.
yeah, thank you for reminding everyone. I see we have now quite a few people on the line, including one former customer of mine, which is great to see. In any case, please use that chat functionality and ask anything you want here. This is a fascinating story. I can imagine, and you explained this in the other podcast, that when you got those calls, both you and your wife, I mean, this must have been extraordinarily emotional.
Yes.
How did you react?
It was well, let me tell you, the waiting period was it was very hard. Because as I think I explained in the other podcast, when you get pregnant, you know it's going to be 9 months before your baby is born.
Right.
In our case, you don't know when you're going to get that call. And so for my wife and myself, that period between May of 2011 and July of 2013, we really don't have any memory of it. It's like when people suffer a severe accident or whatever, and they all of that is just blacked out. It's sort of like that. For me, the sensation every day was being in a completely dark room, holding my breath, trying to find my way forward. It was very, very tough because you don't know if you're going to be selected.
Mm,
You have so many questions about will our child love us? Will we get along as people? Um, and we went to many workshops in the intervening period, and many people told us when that day comes, all that weight will come off of your shoulder. And I have to say, it was amazing how instantly that weight came off my shoulder. There were
mm,
two sensations. One, I finally realized how much weight I was carrying,
mm.
which was a lot, and then the sudden realization that it was gone.
No,
So that's how it felt for us.
but mm,
We had almost given up. Um, Somebody else was asking me about this, about the waiting period at about the 2.5 year mark. We briefly considered working with another adoption agency based in Oakland, California, which specializes in brown and or Latino and Black children,
mm,
and that was a eye opener for us as well. And I'll tell you why. Um, when we had told family and friends that we were considering adopting from Japan, there was lots of positive reaction. People like, "Oh,
mm,
Japan, how interesting," etc., etc. When we started to wonder after more than 2 years, is this Japan adoption going to work for us? Our, what's going to happen? Um, we considered adopting a black boy through this agency in Oakland because their greatest demand was, or greatest need was, young black boys because they had a hard time getting those children adopted. When we mentioned that to family and friends, there was a sound of silence. Uh, uh, People didn't know what to say, and that was disheartening, to be honest. And for me, uh, when we were in process of applying to that agency, um, I don't know if it was a panic attack or an anxiety attack, but I was walking down the street and I thought there had been several articles about police violence against single black males, and I thought to myself, I can't protect my potential son just because I'm Caucasian, because I can't be with him at all times to protect him. And in retrospect, had that come through, had we been able to adopt through that agency, I think I definitely would have moved to Japan because there are
Mm.
difficulties here in Japan um, in that regard. However, in terms of his safety, I would have felt much more comfortable living in Japan. As it turned out, though, what we were told is unlike investments, you cannot hedge your bets. So you have to pick one or the other. And so we were told very clearly you have to choose Japan or you can choose something else. And so you cannot, apply to adopt from France and Italy and Japan.
Oh,
You cannot. You have to put all your eggs in one basket. At least that was the case for us.
interesting. Um, well, thank you for sharing that. As a matter of fact, it kind of dovetails into a question that has come up. And so the question is, and by the way, we won't read your name in it unless you want us to. You can ask for a friend that way. Did you find that discrimination was a problem for you or your son?
Great question. Thank you for that. When we were in the adoption process with Bay Area Adoption Services to adopt from Japan, we had numerous workshops for adoptive parents. And a theme in many of those workshops was dealing with discrimination because oftentimes you're adopting somebody who's racially different from you. Um, by the grace of God or the universe or whatever, it has not been a problem for us in any way, shape, or form in the US or in Japan. And it's very interesting to me because somehow people, even though he's Japanese and I'm Caucasian, people automatically assume that I'm the father and he's the son. And this has happened in California and in Japan with people on the street, with dealing with government officials. So, in our case, it was something that we prepared for very, very diligently,
Mm.
and luckily, did not come to pass. Now, having said that, other people have had discriminatory experiences. I was following a lady who adopted two daughters out of China, and many people will come up with remarks that I think they're trying to be well-meaning, but they will often say to the lady's daughters, "You're so lucky to be adopted by an American because otherwise you'd be working in a factory in China or you'd be involved in child prostitution." And these children would be like, "What does that mean?" So they weren't necessarily discriminatory comments meant to hurt or harm. Um, I've had several people come up to me and congratulate me for being an adoptive parent, which is fine. But I also tell them that the honor is all mine, that I was able to be in this position. And then also, I'm really not that much different from any other parent. It's just how I got my child. So I try to open their eyes that way. But yes, to answer your question, uh, it's frankly, it's quite amazing to me that we have not had to face discrimination. Um, the closest I've come to it in Japan is now the Japanese government, uh, some would say belatedly, is offering all sorts of incentives to parents to encourage increase in the birth rate here in Japan. So they're offering money for attending private schools and academic support and all of this. I found out when I went to apply for that that this is available to Japanese citizens only. So even though so I argued quite quite at length with one agency here in Tokyo because I said my son is a Japanese citizen. Yeah, by the way, he's a Japanese and US citizen. So he is a Japanese citizen. He was born in Japan. He's racially Japanese. So, and he is going to be the one taking on the student loan. So why can't he apply? And basically, it's if your parents are not Japanese, you cannot apply, even though you're the one taking, you, the individual, are the one taking on the loan.
Oh my.
So that was frustrating, but that was the only case of discrimination that I've experienced personally so far as an adoptive parent.
Thank you for that thorough answer. Say, going back to when you were waiting to
Yes.
meet your adoptive son first, you took a few steps, I think, to not jump the line, but at least to increase your chances by being a little bit more open in terms of the attributes. Maybe that's not the right word to use, but in order, for example, you were a little bit more flexible in terms of age, right? And that kind of changed the odds a little bit. Can you explain that?
Yes. Yeah, it was yeah, not so much to jump the line, but to widen the net, if you will.
Mm, that's better.
Um so and thank you for asking this question because I now want to address something that came up in the comments from Unpacking Japan, where there were several unfortunate comments about me and my wife picking a child based on these attributes that I'm about to talk about. Nothing could be further from the truth. We were not trying to pick the best child, the easiest child to raise. That is absolutely not the case. Something adoptive parents face that is unlike birth parents is that you will be asked very direct questions about what can you and what can you not accept. And this is not meant in any way, shape, or form to say, well, I want, a academically bright child and they have to be tall and handsome and blah, blah, blah. But it is about what you and your spouse can handle. And what do I mean by that? So on various business trips during the waiting period, I visited Japan from California, and I always made sure to stop by, make an appointment, and stop by the adoption agency, and also go to the U.S. Embassy and talk with the people at the State Department who are involved with international adoptions, just to remind them of who I was, to
Mm.
show my dedication, to show that I was serious about this. And during one of my visits, I had a very long meeting at the adoption agency where we had, I'll just call it a come to Jesus session. Like, what are we really talking about in terms of what you can and cannot accept? So, uh, I mentioned earlier that that sorry, I lost my train of thought. So, we had originally signed. My wife and I had were in line to adopt a quote older child, which means a child older than 3 years old. Many people want to adopt infants, and if you will kindly remind me to, or kindly ask me a question about that later, I'll explain about that. Um, but my wife and I were too old to adopt an infant. So we were in our late 40s at the time, and there are limits, especially when it comes to the wife's age. That's something you'll find about adoption worldwide. Is it's very much a critical factor is the wife's age, and oftentimes, if the woman is over 45, that can cause some difficulties for adoptive parents. For example, Korea, you cannot be over 35 as a woman. At least when we adopted, that may have changed. I remember one interesting case was for India. Your combined ages cannot be more than 90. So I thought, so if I'm a 70-year-old with a 20-year-old wife, I can adopt. It's um. But anyway, uh, so they asked, well, how much older of a child would you accept? And so I took a deep breath and thought, well, I could go up to age 10 because I really wanted to uh, enjoy that child's childhood. And so I said, well, we'll go up to age 10. And then we got into even more serious discussion about, will you accept a child of incest? Will you accept a child of rape? Will you accept a child whose mother has abused drugs? Will you accept a child whose mother was alcoholic? And for my wife and I myself, the one with alcohol or fetal alcohol syndrome was something that we in our heart of hearts, we didn't feel that we had the family uh resources or the personal resources to responsibly deal with a child who had fetal alcohol syndrome. That was part of a reason that we did not consider Russia, because we were told up front that there was a very good chance of that child having fetal alcohol syndrome because alcoholism is so widespread in Russia. And so I want to again clearly say, I wasn't like, well, that child has fetal alcohol syndrome, I just can't handle it. You and your spouse have to look each other in the eye and say, what can we handle? What can we be responsible for in raising another human being to be his or her best self as a person, as a member of society? What tools or what resources can we give them so that they can be as independent as possible as an adult? And so we felt that uh, for us, the if it were a child whose mother had abused alcohol, we didn't have the tools for that. But for a child who was a product of rape or incest, that was not that child's fault. I'm choking up a little bit here because I'm putting myself back in that interview room. Um, and that child is an innocent victim of that very unfortunate situation. So I came out of that meeting saying, we can accept a child up to age 10, and all those other backgrounds we would be open to, with the exception of alcohol because of what I just explained. So, uh, and then, of course, I also emphasize my interest in Japan, time living in Japan, ability to speak Japanese so that,
Mm,
and then also my commitment to raising that child in a bicultural environment
mm.
where at the time we were living in the United States, but I said I would take him to Japanese school, um, uh, make sure that his culture, his background was respected, all of that. So I did as much as I could to show that I was committed to raising a Japanese child from very unfortunate backgrounds in the best way that I knew how.
Okay, that's great. Well, and you were successful. Say, before we dive into maybe a critique of the system as a whole,
Yes.
I'm curious, could you, I know this is a very complicated aspect of what you've done, but could you explain briefly about the legal relationship that your son still has with his biological parents and how you fit into that or don't? I know that's complicated, but maybe just a brief explanation would be helpful.
Yes. So we adopted our son through what's called a special adoption. And what that means is, to explain to some of the people in the audience who may not know the situation in Japan. When you're born in Japan, your family has what's called a koseki. It's called the family registry. And so that is Japan has these going back centuries in some cases where you can trace your family history back through many, many generations because in Japan, as part of the feudal system of government, everybody their families were recorded and where they were living, etc. So, for example, when you move in Japan from one city to another, you have to register with your local city hall and say, I've moved from this address to this address. It's something amazing to us as Americans because when you move, you just move. You don't register with anyone. You change the address for your credit cards and all that, but you just move. Related to that is the Koseki, which is a family registry, usually based at the family's traditional home. Again, this is something going back centuries. So, in my son's case, when he was born, his parents were legally married. So, that is why he has Japanese citizenship, because he was born to a legally married Japanese couple residing in Japan. And so we're thankful for that because he has Japanese citizenship as a result.
Mhm. Mm.
When you go through a special adoption in Japan, I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, that legal relation between my son and his biological parents is permanently severed.
Ah,
And my son then went on to his own koseki. So it's just him. And we are listed on that registry as his legal parents.
mm,
So that's how it works here in Japan. In the case of special adoption, which is where a biologically unrelated couple adopts another child, and that legal relation is broken. The reason it is broken is, again, in Japan, a lot of the culture, a lot of the legal structure is based on the family unit. And the government and also adoptive parents in Japan want that legal relationship severed so that at some point in the future, some biological parents may not be, they may find themselves in a situation where they want to impose some sort of financial request on on their child.
Ooh,
And so it's very clear in Japan or it's very important in Japan that that legal relationship is severed so that the child is not obligated in any way, shape, or form to uh, to their biological parents. I also imagine there could be a situation where if that biological parent gets into a loan situation and cannot pay it back, then they could go after the child, et cetera, et cetera. So,
mhm,
yeah, because for many children who are living in these institutions, earlier mentioned the 42,000, um, the situation at home with their biological parents is complicated. It's complicated because of domestic abuse, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, mental illness. Um, and so the situation at home is complicated. And that's why these children are living in institutions. But because of those complicated situations, it's um, it's necessary to sever that legal relationship and put the child on their own koseki or family registry.
okay, thank you for clarifying that. Say, shout out to everyone who's live, and now we have quite a few people listening in. We've had one great question. Please put anything you want to ask Andrew in the chat, and we'd be glad to address it because we're live. Before I forget, though, Andrew, you suggested that I ask you a question about the age, like
Yeah.
pre-3-year-old. What were you going to comment about that?
Thank you for that. So, in adoption worldwide, my impression has been that people greatly prefer to adopt an infant. I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is everyone knows how to handle a baby. You just kind of,
Mm,
they're cute and adorable and all of this. But also, there's and this is something that was presented in our adoption training. There's the concept that you'll be getting a clean slate.
uh,
So you'll have this baby and they haven't been abused, they haven't suffered
mm,
poverty, they haven't suffered
mm,
discrimination yet.
mm,
I want to argue the point that it's still complicated adopting an infant. The reason is that that child knows at a very primitive level, very gut level, that they've been separated from their mother. They
mm,
they live for 9 months in the womb, hearing her voice, hearing her heartbeat. They may, after birth, they may have been held by her. They may know her smell, and then one day that suddenly changed.
mm,
And I'm a strong believer that there is a sense of loss in that
mm,
child. And so, even though they may not be able to put a name to it, maybe they don't understand it yet. There's a loss there. There was a separation, and so I know several couples who have adopted infants where they've had to do work
mm,
to help that child adjust in school, socially, etc. Even though that child was adopted as an infant. And the other challenge to adopting an infant, maybe not in the case of racially different adoptions, but there one day will come the question of telling them about adoptive parents and biological
Mm.
parents.
Yeah.
In our case, our son clearly knew. He was 8 years old. He
Yeah.
clearly knew that we showed up and took him off to California. But to get back to your question, my point is adopting an infant is not without its challenges. And so I would encourage people who are thinking about adoption to also consider older children because there's a great need for them. And oftentimes, again, I'll speak about Japan because I know that situation the best. After they reach a certain point, like after five or so, the number of people coming forward to adopt really drops off. And there is a documentary uh, by Al Jazeera, which
Yeah.
was came out about 15 years ago or so, and they talk about it's called Japan's Throwaway Children.
Mm.
And so if you look that up on YouTube, you'll find that easily. Part of it was filmed at the orphanage where my son grew up because I
Oh.
recognize the building. They don't name it for the
Mm.
privacy of the children. But in that documentary, they talk about what happens to children who age out of the system at age 18. And
Mhm.
they do face challenges here in Japan because they go from living in an institution in Japan to suddenly living on their own. And they do get a stipend when they're children, and they get a lump sum payment upon aging out. There are resources, etc., but uh, it's also a challenge because this person is now living on their own. They've been living in a group home, they've been living in an institution. There's been someone making sure they have 3 meals a day and a roof over their head, and they go to school and all of that. Now suddenly this person
Mhm.
has to take care of themselves. Also, as I mentioned before, they're on their own koseki, so they're separated from any sort of family connection. That is a concern for some people in Japan in terms of marriage because they say look at family connections for the if I had a daughter and they're marrying a son who's aged out of the institutional care in Japan, I want to know about his family. Are they good people? Etc. There's that consideration in Japan for some people. So there are certain, and this can also affect their job chances too, because some companies will look at their family background. And so it can be a consideration. I think that's starting to change now,
Mm.
and rightly so in Japan because uh, we have a shrinking population and they need all the good help they can get at companies. But uh, if you watch that documentary, you'll see the challenges that kids face when they age out of the system. And so, my point is adopting infants isn't without its challenges. And also, I would encourage you to, if if your heart and your mind is open to adopting in Japan, to consider children who are, quote, older. And I
Good.
think you'll find that there are many wonderful children out there looking for a forever home. Let me, if I may, I'm going
Yeah.
to now continue about some of the challenges about
Fine.
adopting in Japan. And uh, one thing that frightened me during the when we were awaiting is that something would change regulation wise while we were in the adoption process, and that door would be closed to us. Fortunately for us, the regulations did not change during our adoption process. However, in 20, I wish I knew this date. I think it was in 2018. Yes, 2018, 2016 or 2018. I will double check this. But several years ago in Japan, they changed the adoption law to include what's called a period of nurturing for adoptive parents. So, what does that mean? It means that in the case of special adoption, there is a 6 to 18 month nurturing period in which the adopted child and adoptive parents cohabitate and live together, and then the adoption is finalized in the Japanese family court.
And that has to occur in Japan?
And it has to occur in Japan. So, as you can imagine, I'll just talk about from the American point of view. There are not many Americans who can say, yeah, let's go live in Japan for 6 to 18 months while waiting to have our adoptions finalized. So the U.S. State Department has a very good website that has all sorts of facts and figures about adoption numbers for countries all over the world. You'll see that the number of children adopted out of Japan has never been very high. It's never been more than 2 digits. However, beginning in 2016, you'll see that it's been 0 or 1 per year. So, in Japan, I know that there is Japan has a lot of military personnel based in Japan. I actually know of quite a few military families who have adopted children here in Japan because they're living in Japan. They've adopted in Japan. I also have good friends who they're Australian, not American, but they have adopted 2 children here in Japan. And so uh, I can see the thinking behind this nurturing period. Uh, it makes it makes some sense. Um, However, it does present a significant obstacle to people living outside of Japan who may or may not be able to continue earning a livelihood spending 6 to 18 months in Japan. So that is a key consideration, and it's something that the reason why I'm getting the word out here in Japan and about adopting in Japan is what I'd like to do is put more of this my message out in the Japanese language to help Japanese couples also open their minds and hearts to adopting in Japan. Now, you had mentioned that it's like 300 or 400 a year here in Japan. There are several reasons for that. One is uh, so we have two kinds of adoptions in Japan. We have what are called the uh, special adoptions and then the regular adoptions. And you had mentioned it in your introduction
Yeah.
for today's podcast. So Japan has I think this tradition or this practice goes back to the Meiji era in Japan. So starting in the mid 1800s, if your family had all daughters and no male heirs, you could adopt a male adult who would then take on your family name. So and then keep your family name alive. So I actually have a friend from ICU who he was adopted by his wife's family. So he has a different name now than from when I knew him in college.
Mhm.
And so that is very, I don't know how widespread it is, but it's not unusual here in Japan. What is unusual is adopting children. And what is interesting to me is families will adopt a male son who is not biologically related to them, but culturally, there's resistance to adopting a biologically unrelated child. You know, so yeah, I've spoken to several people about adopting in Japan, and a lot of people kind of, if you live in Japan, where people kind of suck in their breath, which means what you're talking about seems unimaginable or very difficult. So, what I've heard is it's difficult to consider adopting a baby or a young child who's not related to you. The strong preference in Japan, unfortunately, is to adopt infants so that people don't ask questions like if you suddenly start showing up in public with a baby, people assume you've recently given birth. If you show up suddenly with a 3-year-old or 5-year-old, it's like, wait a minute, last week you didn't have a kid and now you have a 5-year-old. What happened? And people really don't like to be asked these kind of personal questions. They want to keep it to themselves. And so there's this, what I see, again, these are all my opinions, not fact, but what I see is a cultural resistance to adopting biologically unrelated children. Now, I have to say, the same case was for me when we were having difficulty having a child ourselves. We thought about adoption, but it didn't click for us. We couldn't see it. We couldn't feel it until that day we met our friend's daughter. Then it changed all of a sudden. So again, it's not meant to criticize people. It's just that because I was in that same situation myself, I could not see adopting a child that I had not created myself. So, however, my point is that in Japan, there's all this discussion now going on about the declining birth rate, about what it means to be Japanese. There's a lot of political discussion about this. And to me, it seems like a tremendous waste in Japan of human talent, of people uh, to uh, not have more what we call forever families in Japan. A family, it doesn't necessarily need to be biologically related. Um, and I'm sure there's many people who would like to have a child in Japan, but they didn't for one reason or another. Maybe because they're both working in their careers. Maybe there's uh, a fertility question. And then there's 42,000 kids living in institutions in Japan. Um, let's get into that. Why are there so many kids? Part of it is that right now Japan, in terms of its government and whatnot, has been very much focused on institutional care. Um, the and there's been very little emphasis on adoption and forever families. There's very little awareness that this is a possibility. And so uh, I don't think many people in Japan know that they can adopt if they're so interested.
Mm,
Um, Also, these institutions, uh, the institution where my son grew up, um, a fantastic place. And I think in general, institutional care in Japan is quite good, especially compared to other countries.
mm,
However, these institutions do receive payment from the Japanese government. And so, if there were a broad shift towards having children moved out of those institutions as quickly as in how should I say as swiftly as humanely possible to a forever family, to an adoptive couple, then that also means instead of getting, we'll just say worst case scenario, 18 years of funding, you only have 5 years of funding or 10 years of funding. So there's a monetary aspect to it as well, where perhaps the institutions are not so incented to move kids into um, forever families because there's a financial aspect to it. I'll be honest, this is something I have to investigate more, but I
mm.
imagine it's a consideration. But the bottom line is that raising awareness in Japan about alternative family organizations is very low right now.
Mm.
And I've seen all sorts of announcements around April 1st about all the kinds of support for encouraging families, like a one time 20,000 yen bonus and support for high school fees, etc. But I didn't hear anything about adoption fees or that kind of thing. So
Mm.
I think that governmental programs to promote forever families and adoptions are still not very present in Japan.
Okay. Well, thank you. And you've preempted several questions, so you're doing all the heavy lifting here. Thank
Oh,
you very much. I wanted to remind you because you probably missed this. We had a great comment. He is so correct about infant adoption. So you definitely hit a nerve there. Also, I tell you what, we're at the end of our hour, but I'm going to ask one more key question in just a second. But if you have a burning question to ask, put that in the chat and we'll try to get to it as soon as possible. Andrew, uh, you've explained a great deal about why adoption rates are so low here. But if we have someone in the audience who's interested in adoption, whether they're Japanese national or not, or whatever their situation is, whether they're living in Japan or not, what are the next steps that they would take in order to learn more about what's possible? Where do you even go to find out about this?
thank you for that question and for being so organized. Thank you. Um, the single best recommendation I would say is to go to your local child guidance center. And it's called C Child Guidance Center. Yeah. So there are child guidance centers throughout Japan, usually in the major metropolitan areas. And these are centers that not just provide support for adoption, but for all sorts of child rearing related issues. So,
Oh, okay.
yes, so child guidance centers, they're government agencies operated throughout Japan in all the big cities. And there you will make an application. You'll fill out all sorts of paperwork. They're gonna any any and all kinds of it's any and all kinds of paperwork that you have will be requested. You must be unfortunately in Japan, you must be a married couple, a married
Mm.
heterosexual couple. Unfortunately for that, you must be able to demonstrate that you have steady income. This is a whole other thing we could get into where adoptive parents are held to much higher standards than biological parents when it comes to taking a child on into their lives. But that's a topic for a whole other podcast. But yeah, I would contact the Child Guidance Center. You're going to fill out paperwork. You're going to be interviewed. They'll do a home study, which means they're going to come to your home and look at your living situation. I'm not sure what it is here in Japan, but we had our home study conducted in the United States, and it was a requirement that the child had his or her own bedroom. So that's maybe perhaps an American perspective because in Japan, families sleep together, blah, blah, blah. Um, and the other thing then, and so in terms of the adoption process itself, a lot of people have asked me, well, it sounds like it'd be really complicated. It really isn't that complicated. It's a pain in the neck gathering all this paperwork and
Mm.
demonstrating your income and all of this. And it might be stressful doing a home study. I'll tell you this, they're not going to be coming into your home with white gloves looking for dirt and stuff. It's pretty normal. They just want to see, is the house clean, reasonably clean, what is the living situation like? So don't panic. Um, but uh, the hard part is the matching
Mm.
because these child guidance centers they have limited staff. The staff, as I mentioned, is not just charged with matching adoptive children. They're um, they're also handling all kinds of other social work.
Mm.
So they're busy. Anyway, they do a tremendous job of finding the right kid for the right parents.
Yeah.
We're amazed in our case. It's a very, very good fit. However, and so, but that fit, there's no formula for it.
Mm.
So it depends on the social workers in your area and who the kids are that are available for adoption in your area, etc. Um, and so the waiting period is the hardest because no one can give you an answer when it will end. And
Mm.
so you have to have faith during that period. And the best thing I can recommend for getting through that period is to talk to other adoptive parents
Ah.
because they will tell because they are the ones who have been there and done that.
Mm.
And so and just having someone else say, "I hear you, I see you,"
Mm.
helps tremendously. Also, if you can meet some parents who have adopted recently so
Mm.
that they have the more recent information. In my case, I'm already feeling a little bit Rip Van Winkle-ish here because it was 13 years ago now,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
landscape has changed dramatically. As I mentioned, like the nurturing period, etc. Some things have changed radically since I adopted. But yeah, those that's what I would recommend. There are adoption agencies, private adoption agencies, but
Mm.
I don't know how many there are here in Japan because we didn't go through them. I do know that private adoption agencies in the US have shrunk drastically in number,
Mm.
primarily because of the nurturing period and other considerations where Americans just aren't able to adopt out of Japan. enough for these businesses to survive because it is a business for them. Let's be frank about that. Also, with some of those agencies, there was a little bit of, uh, uh, in some cases, there were some unfortunate circumstances with the agencies and some where things, at least in the case of adopting from Japan, maybe not corruption, but not everything was above board in terms of the child's background, etc. That's something to be considered. My adoption agency in California, Bay Area Adoption Services, was merged into another agency based in San Francisco called Adopt International. They're still very active. They still are advocating for adoptees' rights. There was a recent scare just a couple of months ago where the Trump administration suddenly banned all immigrant visas, including those for children who were in process to be brought back to the U.S. by their adoptive parents.
Oh,
Luckily, they repealed that after about 2 weeks because Adopt International and various Congress people said, hey, wait a minute, you've got kids literally in transit, in process to be adopted into the United States, create an exemption for them. But my point is there's the adoption landscape is changing. So get resources, talk to people who have adopted, contact in Japan, your child guidance center, or Adopt International if you're based in California, because it's a reputable agency, and get the facts for yourself.
very good. Terrific advice. Well, we are at the end of our hour, a little over, but thank you very much for that extremely detailed discussion. Of course, we didn't even get into the challenges and opportunities of raising a bicultural family, but we will have to do that again at some point. I want to thank all of the listeners, including the person that asked terrific question, and Andrew. Wonderful. You shared so much of a very personal experience with the entire world at this point, and I absolutely applaud you. I'm just in awe of what you've done. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll be in touch with you if you want to have a further discussion about actually raising a child.
Yes. Let's do that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very
All
much.
right.
Thank you
Wonderful.
to everyone who tuned in today. Thank you for your time. If you're considering adopting, we'll share some contact information.
Yeah.
Several people contacted me after the Unpacking Japan podcast. So I met with those people either in person here in Japan
Oh,
or online. So I'm
wonderful.
open to doing that. And I applaud you in your decision to take on a child and give them their forever family. Thank you for that.
Terrific. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks for watching and/or listening to another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts on Real Gaijin. Tell us what you think and be sure to tune in again next time.
Woo!